I was one of those people that did not grow up in church. I had no background in Christianity, never seen a Bible in my entire life. And so when I began my faith journey, there were so many things that now I was being informed that should be a part of my life, practices I should take on, disciplines I needed to develop. And frankly, a lot of those things were so strange to me. They were, in some ways, a little bit intrusive. They were causing me to rethink my values, my habits, my practices. And the first one was just the whole thing about church. Now, when I came to faith, it was in the context of church life. It was around so many people who were followers of Christ, and I was invited to this church in Orlando, Florida, and it was my mom and my sisters and my brother who were going, and I was watching them interact with these people known as Christians and begin to talk about the possibility of faith. And I was pretty skeptical, looking from the outside in. And yet suddenly when I choose to cross the line of faith and to trust Jesus in my life, now I'm told that I should be at church every single week. I had no idea churches met every single week. I didn't know that all over the world there were people who called themselves Christians who made it their practice in life to get up on Sunday morning and go to church. Now, you have to understand this was incredibly intrusive because I grew up loving football. Every Sunday, it was National Football League Day. Sunday was about watching football, and now I'm supposed to make a huge shift in my life where I have to go to church and can't get up and watch the NFL. And then on top of that, I was in college, and I started playing soccer on the college team, and a lot of our matches were on Sundays, and suddenly now I'm being told, well, you're a new follower of Jesus. You need to make church your priority. Now, I didn't know how to play all that out and how to organize it. And all I knew is that there was this incredible tension because this thing that I never even knew existed, church, was not supplemental. It was essential. And I had to ask the question, why does this matter? I mean, this really matter. And I quickly began to discover that church was not supplemental, that being connected to people of faith and walking with them and journeying with them and making the church my tribe, that it was essential to my spiritual vitality, my spiritual maturity, and my spiritual health. But then just past this first introduction that church is now essential in my life, this is something that must matter to me, and quickly did. Then I was, introduced to the concept of giving. Now, if you did not grow up in church, the idea of tithing and giving of your hard-earned money to a church where you have no control over how it's being spent is ludicrous. It just seems insane. And it took me a little while to wrap my head around this. Now, I have to admit, at first it wasn't that big of a deal of an issue because I didn't make any money. And I was in college. I didn't really have a full-time job. I was living off of loans and grants. And so tithing was really not something that pressed me. But the moment I left college and now I'm getting my master's degree and I'm having to find a job and make ends meet and I had no one helping me from the outside. This was just me paying my way through college and paying my way through my master's degree. And now I'm supposed to do this thing called tithe. And I had no idea what the word meant. And they very quickly explained to me that as a follower of Jesus, you give 10% of your money to God through the church so that you can be a part of advancing the mission of Jesus in the world. Now, I didn't necessarily disagree with the idea that you should help invest and finance the good that's being done through the church. I mean, after all, the church had impacted my life and I had received freely what I so desperately needed. But for some reason, the idea of tithing, of giving 10% of my income, that was a little bit tougher. I mean, I looked back and I realized my first annual income after I became a follower of Jesus, after I was finishing my master's degree, I was paid $6,000 a year. That was total. That was the entire package, $6,000 a year. Do you know how hard it is to give $50 a month, around $600 a year to tithe on $6,000? It felt like $1 million. And if I thought it was hard to give $50 a month when I was making $6,000 a year, 10 years later, I had double that income. Years later, after I was married to Kim, I worked my way up to an income of $12,000 a year. Now, they may not sound like much, but that was twice as much as we were making when we first met. And believe me, giving $100 a month when you're only making $12,000 a year, and within that $12,000, you have to pay to take care of your family and to pay for insurance and to pay for health care, and to pay for gas and to pay for a place to live, virtually impossible. And it was so difficult to write that check for $100 a month. And I know what it's like when you work so hard and you can barely make it through the month and barely pay the bills to trust God with your finances. And yet what I'll tell you is that challenge, that crisis, is what formed in me an unshakable confidence and trust in the faithfulness of God. What's fascinating to me is that I was raised really with an environment of generosity. My mom was always, in every one of my memories, an incredibly generous person. Now, we were not people of faith. We didn't grow up in church. We didn't have that religious background to inform us. But my mom was always the mom in the neighborhood who made sure all the kids in the neighborhood had something to eat. My mom was the one who always bought snacks and fruit and vegetables, and all the kids just came and they just devoured everything my mom would buy. And so our house became that home base for all the kids in the neighborhood. And my mom was always posturing herself and us as a family that just gave freely. So that mindset was always placed inside of me. And even my stepdad, with all of his quirks and uniqueness, he always taught me to be a generous person. He always taught me to give of myself. And in fact, I remember when I was out of high school and I didn't go to college and I was just working odd jobs and just trying to pay the bills, that I needed a little extra money. And so I decided to go sell my blood. And I got up and I was going to my car to go make this extra cash. And my stepdad asked me, "Hey, where are you going?" I said, I just found out that they pay you for giving your blood. And he goes, "What?" And he said, yeah. I'm going to make a little extra money, so I'm going to start doing this on a regular basis and selling my blood. And I'm not sure why, but it really upset him. And he said, "Look, people need blood. As far as I'm concerned, you are free to give your blood away, but don't ever sell your blood." And I'm not saying that people who sold their blood are doing the wrong thing. I'm just saying that in that moment, he placed in me something I think really significant. Because just because you can make money on something doesn't mean that you shouldn't actually choose to give it away freely. And so I was raised with these concepts. I was raised with a sense of generosity, even living in El Salvador. And with my grandparents and my Uncle Richard, I always remember Richard being so generous in everything he did. And we lived surrounded by poverty. And whenever people would come by and they're begging for bread or begging for food or begging for some change, my uncle was always finding some way to give them the food we had or the clothing we had or the money we had. And so I'm really grateful that a part of the culture that seeped into me from a really early age was a culture of generosity. And yet, in spite of all of that, you'd think that would just prepare me so well for the concept of tithing. But somehow the moment I was told, you're supposed to give 10%, that just felt harder. It just felt more difficult and more challenging to me. And then to realize that giving 10% was not an act of generosity. It was simply an act of faithfulness, an act of gratitude. That whatever I gave beyond that 10%, that then became my space of generosity. And the context of the times in which we've lived and facing the global pandemic and the quarantine and the economic upheaval and millions upon millions of people on unemployment, it would be easy to ask the question, why does this matter? Why should we give? And in fact, if we give, why in the world should we give to the church? And it's this interesting tension because people absolutely believe the church should give to them freely. But it's not quite as obvious to people that they should give to the church freely. And so I want to kind of lay this from a foundational perspective of why giving is so essential. And I want to propose to you that giving is not supplemental, that giving is essential, that generosity is not supplemental, that generosity is actually essential. And that this whole structure within faith of tithing and giving 10% of our income and then giving generously beyond that, it's not primarily for the good you will do through the church, but actually the way it repostures your life, your heart, your values, your priority for the good you will do in the world. Now, I want to go back to Proverbs chapter 11 and read verses 24 and 25. It says, one person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Let's go back up to verse 24 and just begin here. He says, one person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. And what I really want us to focus on here for a moment is how generosity frees you. That sometimes when we think about things like giving and generosity or tithing or whatever it may be, we often think about what we're doing for others. And by the way, it's a beautiful thing when you give for the good of others. But I want to begin here by letting you know what happens to you, what happens to me when I choose to give. When you choose to give, it says one person gives freely. And isn't it amazing how those two words are next to each other? Gives freely. It's so important to actually begin to pull these two concepts together, that you can actually become a person who gives and live in the reality of freedom. And in fact, the generosity that actually matters to God is the generosity that comes out of our freedom, because that generosity actually gives us our freedom. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. And what I find to be true, and I see this in the scriptures, but I see this in life all the time, is that men and women who actually have a posture of generosity, who give freely, actually open themselves to receiving even more. It is like a mindset shift. It's a perspective shift. It's a filter shift. If you look at the contrast here, it says, another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. Why would someone come to poverty when they withhold unduly? I've seen this even in the lives of millionaires and billionaires. When millionaires and billionaires are lacking in generosity, they may have those millions and billions, but everything in their life begins to unravel. It should not surprise you if someone has incredible wealth and lacks generosity, that their marriages collapse, that their families are in ruin, that their inner world is hollow and empty. It's not because of the wealth. You see, I think a lot of times people think, oh, it's because they have so much money that their world has fallen apart. And it's not that at all. The money isn't what destroys them. It's that love of money. It's that lack of generosity. When you withhold unduly, which is an interesting phrase, by the way. How can you withhold unduly if the money is yours? Or here's a thought that maybe we should all reflect on. Is it possible that everything you have was not entrusted to you so that you could use it for you, but that God has entrusted you with wealth for the good you could do for others? And when you're holding on to the wealth that has been trusted to you, that is actually supposed to be used for the good of others, you're withholding it unduly. And it says, but that person comes to poverty. And I think this is like an interesting tension even in our own society. I think that even the tension in our culture between capitalism and socialism is the conversation around how do you deal with the reality that people may have extraordinary wealth but lack extraordinary generosity. How do you compensate for the lack of generosity, for the lack of humanity, if a person also has a disproportionate amount of wealth? And so the way that economic systems, governments try to solve that is, well, let's take away from the rich so we can disperse that to the poor. Wouldn't it be amazing if governments didn't have to think about that? If in fact, the more prosperous we became, the more generous we became. Wouldn't it be amazing if we actually took our wealth and yes, buy the things you want or need or enjoy, but never let consuming it be more essential than contributing. Wouldn't it be amazing if the more wealth we had, the more generous we became? And so here, the Proverbs are giving us this lesson. One person gives freely and gains even more. And what he's actually telling us is that when you develop a generous spirit, when you have a generous posture in life, you actually become open to all that God wants to bring into your life. You gain even more. Only generous people can actually see behind that veil. See, a person who is greedy cannot see the power of generosity and how generosity opens the world to you. I can tell you this. If you hold on tightly to everything you have, if you have a limited resource mindset, if you're a person who's afraid to give because you're afraid to be without, you will be blind to the endless opportunities all around you. You will literally not be able to see all of the opportunities to prosper because you're focused on keeping what you have. And so it keeps you close-fisted and close-hearted and close-minded to all that might be yours. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. And I can stand here and tell you that this passage and this proverb has so much power and so much truth, not simply because Kim and I have experienced the power and wonder of giving, but we have also experienced the extraordinary power and wonder of receiving. When Kim and I were first married, we were both pretty young. We were in our mid-20s, 25, and we had so very little. We had no furniture. We had no real possessions in life. Everything that we owned, we could put in a grocery bag. But we were so excited and we were so happy to be married. We were both getting our master's degrees, and we got an apartment, and we could barely afford the rent on that apartment. So we did not buy a bed. We didn't have a bed. We could not afford a bed. And Kim and I had conversations about whether we should buy a bed or not. And at that time, I was a little bit more rigid in my way of thinking about these things. And I said, we're not going to buy a bed. A bed is a luxury. It's not a necessity. And Kim kept trying to encourage me, saying, I think we should have a bed. It would be great. And I said, no bed. It's not necessary. And we did have a stereo because I felt like music was essential. So I'm aware of my own hypocrisy in the process. But so we had this great stereo and we were sleeping on the floor. And when I would come home, Kim was just so amazing. She would lay out all these different blankets and put these pillows and create this like beautiful, almost like Saharan desert kind of bedroom. And even without a bed, she made it the most extraordinary place to rest our heads. And she said, are we ever going to buy a bed? And I said, all right, let's just pray. And if God wants us to have a bed, let's see what happens. But we can't tell anyone. So I said, the rule is we can't tell anyone we don't have a bed. And so we didn't tell anyone. And years before, we had been a part of a small church, and we volunteered to work with youth, and we just gave our time there and gave our energy, our talents, our love to these kids. And one of those youth, their parents would oftentimes slip in and listen as we taught and invested in their kids. And I did a series way back years before on the book of James. And the father of one of those kids never forgot that. And he was on a trip, and he was a medical device salesman or something like that. And he was traveling, working with a hospital. And of all the different things he was selling at the time, he was selling hospital beds. And he went to a hotel room, opened up a Gideon's Bible, if any of you know what that is. And he just happened to open up to the book of James. And when he opened up to the book of James, Kim and I came to his memory, to his mind. And he felt suddenly impressed to call us. And out of the blue, this man calls us, who's living in a different city. And he says, I know this is a strange question, but do you guys need a bed? And of course, Kim's like, yes, we need a bed. And I was paralyzed from the inside out, just absolutely shocked that somehow God could speak to this man as he traveled doing his work and told him exactly what we needed at that time in our lives. And I said, well, actually, we do need a bed. And he goes, all right, pick it out. And he sent us this world-class bed into our little apartment. And we went from sleeping on the floor to sleeping in luxury. Now, all I can tell you is that there was a domino effect of generosity. I never knew that Kim and I giving our free time and investing in these kids would somehow cause us to gain even more. And I don't even know if he could ever have seen how investing in us and being generous toward us would actually cause that generosity to expand to touch so many other people's lives. And I've seen both extremes throughout my life. The one who withholds unduly, coming to poverty, and the one who gives freely, gaining even more. See, the reason giving matters is that it changes you. Giving frees you. Generosity frees you. It allows you to have possessions without the possessions having you. It allows you to own things without things owning you. It allows you not only to have a proper relationship to the possessions in your life, but it allows you to have a posture where you can see all the possibilities and opportunities all around you. I guarantee you, if you lack generosity, you do not have the eyes to see all the opportunities God is sending your way. But when you have a heart of generosity, your eyes become open to see the incredible possibilities and opportunities everywhere. Not only does giving free you, not only does generosity free you, but generosity actually heals you. Look at verse 25. It says, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Now, I really want to just take a moment and give context here, because when it says a generous person will prosper, there has been, and there always are, whenever you have healthy principles, there's always something that skews those principles or distorts them and creates something unhealthy out of them. And out of language like this, a generous person will prosper, has emerged something that over the decades became known as the prosperity gospel. And a basic summary of this, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is that it's a teaching that says the reason you give to God is so that God will give to you. And so really it's a consumer-oriented faith that sees God almost as a broker where you give to God because that giving finally unlocks God's generosity and he'll give to you because you've given to him. And it's been an approach toward coercing and manipulating oftentimes the poor who are desperate to find a way out of poverty and have a deep and sincere faith. And someone tells them, you give to me, or you give to my organization, or you give to my ministry, and God's going to bless that and give back to you. And that's not what this teaches. And in fact, years ago, I was invited to speak at this church that has a global influence and a global reputation. And it was the first time I'd ever been in the environment of what is known as the prosperity gospel. And the pastor there got up and of that particular space and said during the offering, if you give to God's house, God will give to your house. And because I didn't think I'd ever be invited back, I just went ahead and said during my talk, hey, that's really not a proper mindset. And I talked about how like lions hunt when they're hungry, but tigers hunt for the thrill of the hunt. And that we need to shift from being lions to tigers, that so oftentimes the only reason we ever go after God is because we need something, but we actually need to pursue God for the joy of the pursuit and the joy of the journey. And I said the same thing is true with giving. Don't give because God will give you something in return. Give for the extraordinary exhilaration of the beauty of generosity. And I did that gathering at that place, I think 4 times, and each time during the offering, in the most beautiful way possible, I kept hearing the language change until the last gathering, the pastor got up and said, you should give to God's house, whether God ever gives to your house or not, because of all he's already done for you. See, and the reality is that if you understand the scriptures and you believe them, God himself has stepped into human history, took on flesh and blood. His name is Jesus, lived a sinless and perfect life, was crucified on our behalf, was buried and then raised from the dead. I mean, Jesus gave his life for us. What else does God need to do for us to be ridiculously generous toward God? There shouldn't be any quid pro quo with God. We shouldn't be going, okay, I'm going to give God because if I give, you'll give to me. God already gave. He already gave everything. He already gave the ultimate gift. He already gave himself. So there shouldn't be any expectation of quid pro quo. I mean, if right now, if I told you God will never give you anything else, but you should still be radically committed to generosity, would you think I'm out of my mind? See, I think a lot of times we try to find some secondary motive to motivate each other to give, but I don't want to do that. See, I don't think God has to ever do anything else for you or for me. See, what he did in Jesus, the sacrifice of himself on the cross, it's more than enough. So I don't want God's generosity to become, quote, the motivator of our generosity in the reverse. Don't be generous toward God, hoping he'll be generous toward you. Be generous toward God because God has already been generous towards you. And yet he says this, and I believe in the truth of it. A generous person will prosper. Now, I am absolutely convinced this is true, that a generous person will prosper. That generous people prosper at a level and a depth that wealthy people do not. And I think we need to realize that there's a difference between wealth and success and fame and the prosperity that the scriptures talk about. Because when the Bible talks about prospering, it's talking about a wholeness and a wellness of your being. And yes, that can have huge implications in every other arena of your life. It can have financial implications and business implications and economic implications and implications in terms of your success and influence and so many other arenas of life. Because when you live your life the way God designed for you to live, it's going to go better. You shouldn't be surprised by success. But when he says a generous person will prosper, I think he's saying at the deepest soul level, that prosperity of fulfillment, where you can look in the mirror and be satisfied with the person you're seeing there, where you're becoming the person that God created you to be, and where you're finding the healing of your soul that you've always longed for. This is one of the most beautiful promises in all the scriptures. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. He's actually guiding us on a path to healing, saying this is how you get refreshed. You become generous. You give yourself away. You sacrifice for others. You hold what you have with open hands and cling onto nothing, because when you give and you serve and you invest in others, you're refreshing them, and you will be refreshed. Yesterday, I was with Kim just for a little while because she was really busy, and she was scrambling around the house and running around. I said, "Where are you going?" And she named a couple of the homeless people that come over to Larchmont all the time. And she goes, "I'm taking Desmond, I'm taking Victor to get breakfast." And so I'm picking him up and taking him over there. And, one of my little voices in my head was like, "Well, what about my breakfast?" And what about me, right? And of course, I'm more than capable of taking care of myself and making breakfast for me. And yet Kim makes the best breakfast in the world. But I could see she was more alive. See, I know it's been a hard 2 years. I've seen the toll it's taken on my family and my friends. I've seen the toll it's taken on our team here at Mosaic, on so many people. And I've also felt the deep toll it's taken on my wife. And yet I'm watching her full of life and full of energy, and I see hope being restored in her, not because people are running around refreshing her, not because people are running around trying to heal her or make her life better, all because she found two people who needed help more than she needed help, who needed to be refreshed even more than she needed to be refreshed, who needed to be loved even more than she needed to be loved, and she was willing to give of herself and the sacrifice. And somehow in refreshing others, I could see that she was being refreshed. Her trips to Malawi are exhausting. The journey is brutal. And in fact, if you've never been on a trip with Kim, unless you have the soul of Navy SEAL, I don't always recommend it, because she doesn't mess around. She doesn't let anyone live in the space of luxury. Everyone toughs it out. Everyone's the same. And she never allows her teams to have it easier than the people they're serving. And yet, I don't know if anything in the world refreshes her more than serving in one of the most difficult contexts and environments imaginable. See, the scriptures are giving us an insight to how humans are designed. See, you're not designed to prosper without being generous. When you lack generosity, you lack the internal environment to actually enjoy whatever you are achieving. Listen to me. You can have all the wealth and all the success and all the fame and all the celebrity and all the power in the world. But if you lack a spirit of generosity, none of that will prosper you. And none of that will heal you. Because it's giving that frees us and giving that heals us. It's generosity that sets us free, and generosity that heals us and refreshes our souls. There's just something unexplainable about the joy of giving and watching someone else experience the wonder of that gift, the wonder of that moment. I think it may be the moment you feel most like God, when you give of yourself with no motive, with no intent of reciprocation, no hope of something being returned to you. That moment where you simply give out of love, a pure and true act of generosity. It's in that moment I think we best understand God. It's in the moment when we are most free. It's in that moment where we find the healing that our souls long for. I want to take a moment just to look at a passage in the New Testament, because I want you to see not only does generosity free us and heal us, but I want you to see with me that that generosity also unleashes us. In 2 Corinthians 9, verses 6 to 11, Paul says this, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. As it is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way. Listen to this again. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. Paul is unwrapping for us the way God sees our integration of generosity into our lives. He says, now there's a basic principle here. Remember, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. So he's saying, look, there's a principle in the universe. If you give very little, then you're going to receive very little. Now, this is just true in life, by the way. If you are unkind to people, you will not receive a lot of kindness back. If you are unforgiving toward people, you will not receive a lot of forgiveness in return. If you don't treat people with value, you will not be treated with value. If you don't value friends, friends will not value you. Frankly, this principle is true in every arena of life. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. So if there are deficiencies in your life and you say, I wonder why this isn't true in my life, look at what you've been sowing, because your harvest, what you reap, is a direct relationship to what you have sown. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. I can tell you, I have had the most extraordinary experiences in my life. And so many of those experiences have nothing to do with wealth or success or notoriety or anything. They have to do with the value of relationships, of loving people and investing in them and caring for them and genuinely caring about their lives, because they matter. And what I've seen in my life are relationships that I invested in 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that I had no idea would ever come back to me with something really beautiful, have so often has returned to me to bring something so extraordinary that I could have never imagined it, because you do reap what you sow. And if you're reaping sparingly, it may be that you have also been sowing sparingly. And if you want to reap generously through your life, you have to sow generously. He goes on to tell us each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Because this is not about a habit or a practice or even a discipline or commitment. This is about a posture of the heart. He's saying you need to give in alignment to who you are and who you choose to become. And so when you give from the right posture, you give with joy and cheerfulness. He goes on to say, and God is able to bless you abundantly. And I love the description here, so that in all things, at all times, having all you need, you will abound in every good work. See, God wants you to have everything necessary. He designed your life to have everything necessary to live the life He created you to live. But what we don't realize so oftentimes is that all the resources that God intends for us, all those resources are locked into the treasures of meaningful relationships. And if you do not value people, you will always live your life in a deficit, no matter how much you ever achieve, no matter how much wealth you ever attain. No matter how famous or successful others may see you, in the quietness of your own moments, you'll know the deficit of your soul. But here he's saying that when you live a life of generosity, when you posture your heart toward giving and serving and investing in others, this is when God works and he pours out his abundance so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. As it is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower, that's God, by the way, and bread for food, will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. He's letting us know that God wants to pour into us more than we could ever imagine, but he's not going to pour more into us until we are willing to pour more into others. God is not going to pour into us if we are a dead end. God is going to pour into us if we become a portal of his generosity and his goodness to others. And he says, you will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. So here's the end game. Your generosity unleashes creativity. It unleashes all the creative essence that God has placed in you. He says, and you'll be enriched in every way. Why? So that you can be more famous, more popular, more successful, more awesome? No. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. So this is God's ultimate end, that through our generosity, people might see the generosity of God. Why this matters? Because giving makes us like God, and generosity reflects the character of God. And when we give, we begin to live our freedom, we begin to find our healing, and we begin to unleash our creativity, because we begin to do so much good in the world that the world becomes astonished and asks, what in God's name is happening to that person's life? And you can say, that's exactly right. What's happening in my life is exactly because of Jesus, and that's his name. And you may be listening right now and you've been thinking about following Jesus. You've been contemplating whether you should trust Jesus with your life. And maybe one of the things that always holds you back is, well, you know, what's the church's relationship to money? But here's the more important question. What's holding on to you? Are you holding on to things and so your hands are so tight you can't open your hands and take a hold of what God has for you? See, Jesus tells us, look, you can't love money and love God. You have to be willing to let go of everything and take a hold of him. And so, yeah, it's a pretty extreme invitation. Give your life to Jesus. Let go of everything else and take a hold of him. And let him change your life so that everything you have will never have you. Everything you own will never own you. And so that you can become an instrument of generosity to heal the world around you, to set the world free, to do the good that you could have never imagined you were capable of doing. If right now you'd like to trust Jesus with your life and cross the line of faith, I want to invite you right now just to pray this very simple prayer. Jesus, I give you my life. The relationship begins with giving, but not with you giving your life to him, but realizing he already gave his life for you. So this moment, when you say, Jesus, I give you my life, would you realize that what you're doing is receiving his gift of his life to come to dwell in you. Right now, just tell him, Jesus, I give you my life. Jesus, I give you my life. Right now, just receive the gift of his generosity, the gift of his sacrifice. Right now, just receive him as you give him your life and let Jesus change your life forever. Why this matters? Because giving makes us like God.